Welcome to the fourth and final lecture for Chapter 10. In this lecture, we will be talking about the final relationship type talked about and that you read about in Chapter 10, looking at workplace relationships. When we think about workplace relationships, we tend to construct this chapter in this conversation looking at two of the relationship types we've already talked about, friendships and romantic relationships. But what makes these relationships unique when they exist within the workplace? And so some of the things that I've pulled out and really drawn from your chapter reading is looking at kind of the benefits and potential challenges of relationships in this environment. And so as we think about benefits, we can really think about, first friendships, looking at the benefits of friendships in the workplace. We know that when coworkers are friendly with one another, they can often provide a great source of information about kind of maybe the workplace or the different tasks that are expected, understanding the culture within the workplace, so thinking about socialization of new members. But they can also be a great source for support. And so thinking about, when there's a difficult task at hand, or maybe there's a conflict in the workplace, or maybe you're just, are tired and want to vent to somebody about what's going on at work, having friendships in the workplace can be a really great source for that kind of support. So when you're experiencing stress about work, maybe sometimes people outside of the workplace may not have the understanding of what's really going on, but people within the workplace do. They have that unique understanding of the situation, and they can be a really great source of support. So really thinking about having even at the most fundamental level, when you enjoy who you work with, you enjoy your work better, and you don't kind of hate going to work. And so we do see some higher productivity and satisfaction. So when a work culture falls in line with kind of that friendly environment, people getting along, having friendly relations, we do see higher levels of job satisfaction, and so that's really important. That's just why we see organizations trying to foster relationships, friendships in the workplace, or at least friendly relations. And we see that through like work retreats and social events. And that's because of the benefits of having kind of coworkers that get along and that tend to think about each other in a friendly way. But there can be some challenges to having close friendships in the workplace. And so we could think about the challenge between navigating social and task dimensions. And so thinking about what happens when people are doing too much socializing because they're friends at work, as opposed to really focusing on kind of the task at hand and completing the work that you should be doing while at work. We can also think about potential when there's conflict within the friendship, how that may affect the workplace, as well as when we think about maybe a subordinate or supervisor-subordinate relationship. When there's a friendship involved, the waters may get murky about are you talking to me as a friend? Are you talking to me as as my boss? When there's potential discipline action that needs to be taken, it may be hard for supervisors to discipline a subordinate that they're really close friends with. That may have potential negative implications on the friendship aspect of that relationship. So really thinking about some of the potential nuanced challenges that can exist when we have close friendships that are also our coworkers, especially when there's that power dynamic. And I talked a little bit about that in an earlier lecture. We can also look at romantic relationships in the workplace in a similar way. So thinking about some of the benefits that were discussed of workplace romance. I know it's weird to think about this because a lot of organizations have policies against workplace romance, and so we'll talk about some of those challenges in a moment, reasons for why we have those policies. So thinking about, but some benefits could be that it could improve kind of positive feelings towards the workplace. You may enjoy going to work. because you are seeing that other person, which can produce satisfactory working conditions. But then also, we see sometimes because of certain policies, oftentimes if you're in a relationship with a coworker, you have to be in a different department or a different unit. And so this can foster communication between workplace departments. So thinking about, the tech department working, like maybe having get-togethers with the HR department because these two people are in a relationship because they're, want to see each other outside of work as well. So it can really foster friendships and friendly relations because of that romantic relationship. But we do know that romantic relationships in the workplace can create challenges. So thinking about the similar challenges that we see with friendships, navigating that social and task dimensions, making sure that when you're at work, you are working and really prioritizing the work part of your relationship as opposed to the romantic part. But then we also see turbulence if the relationship ends. So we know that from our earlier discussions that romantic relationships have a very specific ending point. They have a breakup point, and so that breakup may interfere with the relationships in the workplace. And so thinking about, if the breakup isn't, if it's kind of a difficult breakup, then we can potentially see where it would be hard to work with that person every day, but we could also see how that could kind of have a ripple effect into other relationships and other parts of the workplace. Another potential challenge to romantic relationships in the workplace really exists within the superior-subordinate relationship. And so really thinking about the power dynamics. And this is really where we see a lot of policies put into place in workplace organizations. So it's not necessarily that they totally ban romantic relationships, but they ban romantic relationships between supervisor and subordinate individuals. And so if that relationship would exist, they have to report it to HR, and usually they'll move a person, one of the people, so either the supervisor is no longer supervising that subordinate or vice versa. So really thinking about how power dynamics complicate a romantic relationship. And one really problematic situation that we have been seeing a lot of in our current climate in our society is the rise of sexual harassment. And so thinking about sexual harassment as an unsolicited, unwelcome behavior of sexual nature, there are two forms. There's quid pro quo, when a supervisor offers an employee some sort of rewards or exchange for favors, usually in the sexual nature, or a hostile work environment. So this occurs when work conditions are sexually offensive or intimidating. It could also be a result of if, a kind of social or sexual advanced was initiated by a supervisor and a subordinate, was like, I'm not comfortable with that. Then sexual harassment, if later, because of that interaction, the person was maybe passed over for like a promotion or just began to experience hostile behavior towards them, that would also fall under kind of this hostile work environment. So thinking about, that feeling that if you don't engage in, their advances or you don't socialize with them outside of work or whatever, that your work conditions would then be affected, and that you wouldn't have a good relationship with them in work. Maybe they wouldn't assign you to certain tasks, and so thinking about maybe that person, that supervisor, then becomes hostile towards you because you didn't have drinks with them or whatever, and so really thinking about how problematic that can be, and you're really going to explore this area of romantic relationships in the workplace, specifically looking at supervisor-subordinate relationships and sexual harassment, both quid pro quo and hostile work environment, in your last, your fourth and final for this second half class discussion. So you'll be listening to a podcast again called Working in the Gray, and you'll respond to some of those areas of identifying and discussing sexual harassment in those stories that you hear, stories that represent when these things occur in the workplace. It's a really interesting podcast, and it sparks a lot of really cool and thought-provoking discussion when I've done this in the past. So I'm really looking forward to your comments and to your participation in that forum.